Now in this edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll be taking a look at the results of, and your comments from, the poll that asked the question, what rating would you give Attack of the Clones? We'll then see how the results stack up against the other movies we've done thus far. And wasting no time here, let's jump right into those results, where we'll see that 40% of people said it was about average, while 23% thought it was a good movie, and 5% thought it was amazing. Then on the other side of things, there were 24% of people who thought it wasn't very good, while another 7% thought it was terrible. And so when we do the math, we get an average score of 2.92 stars, or just a bit under average. When we then compare it to the other two films we've done thus far, it comes in last place, and will likely stay there until we get to the rest of the Disney-era films, where I think both The Last Jedi and Solo have a chance, or are very likely, to finish below it. And speaking of the other films, if you're watching this now, it means the poll for Revenge of the Sith is already up. And I'm curious where you think we should move to after this. Should we do the original trilogy or the anthology films next? Because I do plan on saving The Last Jedi for, well, last. Anyway, let's keep this moving and get to the comments now, where as usual, I'll try to read a blend of both positive and negative, while briefly responding to some and just reading others. And let's kick this off, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this time came to us from Troy Kostasic, who said, "This was the worst movie of the prequel series. Who paid for and ordered the creation of the clones is never followed up. Yoda laments the Clone War starting when he was the one who showed up with them and started shooting. The motivation of the Separatists is never really explained. What were they fighting for? The worst part was Obi-Wan and Anakin were never shown as buddies. They never did anything together that they both seemed to enjoy. They just sniped at each other. I think their age difference was the main problem. How is a teenager and a 30-year-old supposed to relate to each other? When Obi-Wan wistfully recalls the old days with his friend Anakin, he doesn't give an impression that their time together was filled with annoyance and sarcasm. Why weren't they ever shown having a drink together, gambling at a casino, playing a sport, or doing something that guys do to bond? The audience can never buy into their friendship, and it really undercuts the momentousness of the dialogue between Vader and Obi-Wan in A New Hope. And I do agree with a lot of this. I've said many times before that Attack of the Clones is the messiest and least focused of the Star Wars films. There's a lot of curious questions in here that never again get touched upon, at least not in the films, like Sifo Dyas and the clones. And though in the first third of Revenge of the Sith, we do get to see more friendly banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan, they spend the second act of the film apart, and when they meet again in the third act, well, let's just say they're not exactly friends anymore. And though in the Clone Wars animated series, we do get to see a lot more of the relationship between the two, and we can buy that they've been friends for a long time, and they even have that drink together that you asked about. As I always say, the movies do have to stand on their own, and you can't rely on the other sources of canon to be patchwork for you. And so in terms of convincing us that Obi-Wan and Anakin were such good friends as Obi-Wan does indeed lament in A New Hope, this movie does nothing for that, and Revenge of the Sith does pretty much the bare minimum. Alright, let's now move on to this comment from 33 Thai Guy, who said, I rated it 1 star, then I remembered I loved the Obi-Wan parts of the film, so it doesn't redeem it, but it does bump it up to 2 stars. Ewan McGregor is just too good as Obi-Wan. And the funny thing is, I think there's a lot of fans, and not just the prequel era fans, who think of Ewan McGregor as the definitive Obi-Wan over Sir Alec Guinness. And it's a poll I've been meaning to do, to ask who you think is the definitive Obi-Wan, if you can even pick. And I'd of course include James Arnold Taylor, who does the voice of Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars, because I think there's a lot of people who consider him the definitive Obi-Wan as well if you grew up with the Clone Wars, which a lot of today's fans have. Anyway, let's move on to this comment now from Zeke Craft, who said, it's not great, but it's the best of the prequels in my opinion. This one at least shows Palpatine pulling a lot of strings and how the Empire came to be. Other than the painful love story portion, I have no complaints with this movie. Next up here, we have this comment from Matteo De Janeiro, who said, 3 stars. I love the prequels. I've always been a prequel shill, and I've been told I'm an idiot since they came out, but as I've gotten older, I understand why it is objectively not a good film, but I'll be damned if anyone can take away how excited 12-year-old me was seeing Yoda jump around with a lightsaber. And there were many people who said something just like this, that they loved it as a kid, and now that they're older, they can kind of see some of the flaws of the film, but they're not going to let that ruin their enjoyment of the movie. Which brings us to this comment from Phil101, who said, after reading the comments for this poll and the others, I think people's views of the films depend on what age they were when each film came out. If you were a teenager when the prequels came out, you are more inclined to be nostalgic for them. If you were old enough to have seen the original trilogy at the cinema, then you are more likely to have been disappointed. What I'm trying to say is that your age can create a different impression and a bias. And I think you are 100% correct. Depending on when you see Star Wars and what context you see and what movie you see, kind of will influence what type of fan you may end up being. For example, I've said before, my favorite Star Wars movie is Return of the Jedi, hands down, because I seen it in the theater when I was 5 and can remember that being the first movie I've ever seen. Now, objectively today, do I think it is the best Star Wars movie? No, I think that honor goes to The Empire Strikes Back. But for me, Return of the Jedi always has been and always will be my favorite, and if Attack of the Clones is the movie you have the most memories attached to, and it's your favorite, then so be it. And speaking of how we can be influenced by certain things, we have this comment from KnowWho, who said, I honestly think people are overrating this movie because of how much they hated Last Jedi. How you feel about one movie shouldn't affect how you feel about the others. Everyone always hated this movie. What happened? I was worried when I saw the poll results and realized how many people liked the movie, but reading through the comments, I see that there are a significant amount of people who love it. WTF. I literally heard no one say this before. And I do think this is the culmination of many different things here. Fans who were young when the prequels came out are now much more vocal about their love for them than they could be back then. Also, the sequels have made people go back and re-examine these films with a different eye. And there were many comments who said they rated the prequels higher now than they would have back then because of the sequels. Now, is it right to boost an older movie well after the fact because of the disappointment of another? Well, I guess that's up for the individual who's judging these films to decide. And then there's also what I touched on last week in regards to all this, that a lot of people who didn't like the prequels have let their anger for it go, more or less. They don't feel the need to speak out and bash them anymore, even though they still don't like them. Okay, moving on now, let's get to this comment from Maxwell Buffy, who is going to defend something that a lot of people take issue with. And he said, I'm going to go out on a limb and defend the love story since it's the point everyone disparages. If you listen to every scene Anakin and Padme have alone together, they are connecting. When they first meet, Anakin tries to act mature and mighty, gives us the best display of lightsaber skill of any of the movies when he cuts the centipedes, because he is an emotional teenager who has never been taught how to flirt with women. Jedi attachments are forbidden, and so the most insight he has on this issue is the typical bury your feelings deep down. When they are alone, they first start to talk about their lives and how they have both dedicated themselves to a higher cause that demands the sacrifice of themselves and their desires. They talk about Padme's past relationships, which Anakin won't have any to tell of, but usually when you and a girl are talking about past relationships, it's because there is interest in each other, and Padme clearly enjoys making Anakin jealous. They sit at dinner and Anakin makes her laugh and tells jokes about his time as a Jedi. They then sit alone in that room with the fireplace and have a moment where they actually get real and lay their cards on the table about how they feel. Anakin goes first because he is young and wears his heart on his sleeve, while Padme is a politician and is well versed in being able to mask her true intentions. They agree they both feel the same way, but while Anakin has allowed himself to indulge, and Padme too with the regards to the kiss, she has been holding back because she is older and knows what it means for their lives. And only when faced with death in that arena does she finally have the courage to open herself up to him. Not saying this is perfect, but to say it doesn't make any sense is to simply not really have given the movie a real viewing. And when you lay it out like that, it sounds like a great love story that makes sense. And I'd argue it was the execution of that, plus some rough dialogue, even for a guy who'd never flirted before, combined with a lack of chemistry between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman, where it truly falls apart. And so, in my opinion at least, it's one of the many things that takes a fantastic, albeit ambitious idea for a story, and turns it into a less than amazing film. Okay, let's now get to this comment from Kyle Butler, who said, once the Coliseum scene starts, it's a 4 or 5 star movie. Before that, it's a 2-star movie. All the parts with Jango are awesome, all the parts with Anakin are hit or miss. Then we have this comment from Drew Manning, who said, for me, all Star Wars movies have to have the 3 E's: escapism, entertainment, and expand on the myth, lore, storytelling. When Attack of the Clones first came out, I was annoyed by all the Anakin Padme stuff, but I always loved the Obi-Wan subplot and the Yoda fight at the end. In a post-Last Jedi world, I really can't hate this one. Then there's this comment from Ayden LeMay, who said, not going to claim that it's a cinematic masterpiece or that the CGI holds up or anything, but damn, it's fun to watch. Then there's this comment from Kuda70GT, who said, Attack of the Clones was by far the worst of the prequels. Pointless waste of film. At best, it was filler like lettuce in a Star Wars Big Mac. After Episode 1, we had high hopes for Episode 2, and it was a letdown. Then there's this comment from Guess Who 7197 who said, yes, the overall film has flaws, and up until the new trilogy, it might have been my least favorite of the 6, but I still consider it enjoyable overall, and I will always appreciate it for finally making the clones more than just a glossed over mention, since I always believed the Clone Wars sounded like some really interesting lore that I wanted to know more about, and I absolutely agree with that. Since the first time I remember seeing A New Hope, I've wanted to know more about the Clone Wars, and something tells me we're not alone. Then there's this comment from Adam Savais who said, I lean towards terrible, but then I remember there are some terrible movies out there that makes this seem better. It was one of the best Star Wars scores, it had good elements, there is a greatness in the idea, but just kind of falls apart, worse than The Phantom Menace. I bet if George still had a Marcia and a group of people that pushed back and made him clean things up, this would have been great. But with no one to tell George, I think X, Y, and Z are not good, let's tweak them, we got this. And if you want to quickly and easily sum up where the prequels went wrong, it's because nobody was telling George Lucas no. And I do mean nobody. As I always say, just go back and watch the behind-the-scenes footage from the prequels, and all you'll ever hear people telling him is yes and how great his ideas are. Okay, let's wrap this up now with a comment from Liam Zybarth who said, not as bad as some say, not as good as I'd like to say. It's just alright. And that sums it up pretty well for me, because I don't think, or want to believe at least, that this movie is that bad. Sure, it's flawed, and many of those who said they loved it, or were kids when it came out and feel strongly about it because of that, said they can now look back at it with a critical eye and see that there are issues with it. But that doesn't change how they feel or take away their enjoyment, which I can completely understand and certainly get behind. And though I think, objectively speaking, most fans will agree this is not the best of the Star Wars films, there are many things to love about it. The world building in it is fantastic, and poorly executed or not, it's become a critical part, hell, a pivotal part, in the story of Anakin Skywalker. And though the CGI maybe doesn't meet today's standards, there are some incredible visuals to behold nonetheless. All in all, I love the concept or idea of this film. I love what it tried to do, and if it had somehow pulled everything off smoothly, it'd probably sit alongside Empire Strikes Back as one of the greatest Star Wars films, if not the greatest. But since it didn't, it currently rests at the bottom of our list. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of Attack of the Clones, or the results of this poll, or feel free to go vote and comment on the Revenge of the Sith poll that should now be up, a link to which will be in the description below. Either way, leave a comment somewhere and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.